Welcome to Storytime with Tallulah. Today's reading comes from r/MaliciousCompliance, titled Shame Me with Lunch Detention? Joke's on you, I will sit here forever. I'd forgotten about this story until the other day when I was chatting with a friend I went to high school with. It's silly, but I think it fits. Too long didn't read? At the end. It was the late 90s, I was still wearing too much flannel and continuing my historical trend of keeping books from the library much too long. I had a paper due for my sophomore global studies class, so I naturally took out more books than I could read, wrote the essay, and completely forgot about the books piled in the corner of my bedroom. After a series of overdue slips sent to my homeroom, I eventually did return the 4 or 5 books one sunny afternoon in the anonymous book drop during a study period, promptly moved on to bigger and better things. About 2 weeks later, I was called down to the assistant principal's office. In that space of time before classes officially started, that was reserved for one thing and one thing only. The reprobates and delinquents were in trouble. I walked the halls thinking that surely this was just a timing mishap and I was being summoned to receive congratulations for some kind of award I didn't know I'd entered into competition for. Yep, he just wants to prepare me for the surprise ticker tape parade. I was wholly unprepared to hear that I was receiving lunch detention. To start immediately, because I had not returned a single book that I still remember was slim and had a white and red cover from my GS paper research. I tried to argue that there was a mistake since I was sure, like I am sure that I have fingertips, that I had returned it. But he could not be moved and I was sentenced to indefinite lunch detention until I either returned the book or paid the $16 to replace it. I left the office late for the first period, defeated, but kept my head held high at lunch later that day as I walked past the entirety of the cafeteria, which held a couple hundred of my peers. Plastic food tray in hand, I went down the hall to the old shop classroom that had since been moved and was awaiting detention. I checked in with Mrs. Brown at her desk in front and took an inconspicuous seat in the back. Staring down at my canned peach slices, I braced for the worst. A murderous ruckus was going to break out any minute, I could tell. But once my ears stopped ringing, I discovered that it was really a calm escape from the crowded and rowdy lunchroom. I ate slowly that day, enjoyed my young thoughts and blissful quiet, and wondered what kind of heaven was this? To be fair, I did search far and wide for that book that first day. Attempts to find it in my locker, bedroom, and backpack were fruitless, and the general consensus in my home was that the school was being ridiculous. I certainly wasn't going to pay for something I didn't lose. So the next day, considering my brief brush with the law and the invisible stain already attached to my reputation, I went armed with a book and my lunch past the maddening crowds to the detention room. I sat there day after day for nearly 2 months of lunches. In retrospect, to this day, those remain some of the most relaxing lunch breaks of my life. I had around 40 solid minutes to recharge in mostly complete silence with my reasonably priced lunch and whatever book I was currently reading. I had to recount my origin story a few times since no one can figure out how the quiet bookworm of a girl who had never been in trouble before had landed in the wilds of detention. But I was mostly left to my own devices in this newly found peaceful retreat. I was friendly with Mrs. Brown, who had worked for the district of my small town since I was in elementary school, and even hooked her up with a sweet horse whisper poster that she loved from my family's mom and pop video store. She must have felt bad for me because somewhere around the month mark, she started up a collection to cover the cost of the book. She added the initial donation, but teachers who would stop by to chit-chat would add loose change to it, and race to buy my freedom was on. After a few weeks, she handed me just under $7. My love of solitude was no match for the guilt of carrying around that money or my mom, who had just started a new job in the school district. So with a heavy heart, I paid in full for the missing book and went back to my old lunch table in the thick of the action. Months later, during the last week of school, I was called down to the library at my convenience and with sweaty palms, forced myself to face the music over what was inevitably going to be yet another overdue book at the end of the day. Well, lo and be effing hold, the end of your inventory check had located the book as waylaid in the wrong section of the library. I received a few sheepish looks from the librarians as they refunded the money and apologized in a backward way that still made me the bad guy, as overdue books are the real blemish on one's character. So how were they to assume that I didn't lose the book? Remember, my mom's new job in the school? Well, she just happened to be walking by the library just as I was finishing up, and to say that she had laid into them is a far too extreme sounding. But she did scold some stern-faced librarians into giving me a proper apology. She also demanded that they look into reforming their system, and my favorite part, take the proper measures to expunge my record. She was very concerned about me carrying around the albatross of false accusation, apparently. And just like that, my life of crime was over. Too long, didn't read. Got lunch detention thanks to a missing library book. Discovered it, I loved it. Intended to sit there the rest of my high school career until the teacher running detention took up a collection to get me out. Book was found in the library, and my mom chastised women who were likely as old as time itself. Wow, that's unfortunate, but at least you found the bright side, right? The grass is always greener. I guess that was a good moment for you, but I'm glad it all got worked out. Well, the next story also comes from Malicious Compliance, entitled, New Hire Misses Most of the First 3 Weeks of Work, Then Uses Me as a Reference. Too long, didn't read. Neighbor, Karen, takes advantage of our company with outrageous claims, then uses us as a reference. We get our point across with creative wording. Karen continues to use us as a reference and was clueless we protected fellow business owners. Let's call her Karen, just because it fits. She came in and applied for a job, and when I looked at her resume and application, I realized she knew some of my old neighborhood friends and schoolmates. She interviewed well, so I gave her a job. I told her to be on Monday at 9 a.m. Monday morning, she is not in. She has no calls, no shows. Tuesday, no call, no show. I had now written her off. Wednesday, she shows up about noon. Claims she was in her basement Sunday night and her brother was working out and he accidentally knocked her out during his intense workout. She claimed her doctor told her she had a concussion and she had to stay home for a couple days. She had no doctor's note, no marks on her head, but thinking her story was so off the wall it could almost be true. I let her come to work the next day. She worked Thursday and Friday. We got paid at the end of every week and I gave her a check Friday. I also did not deduct the days she missed. She came to me and asked about the full paycheck. I told her we were a family business and realized people had lives outside work. He tried to make sure people knew they were appreciated and tried to take care of our people. She teared up and thanked me and said we could count on her. She worked the full next week, did okay. She seemed to fit in. Seemed. The third week, she showed up Monday, but Tuesday was another no show, no call. We did not hear from her for over 2 weeks. When she finally showed up, her story was the stuff of legends. She claimed her husband had forged divorce papers as a couple years previous. Thinking she was divorced, she moved back into her parents' house. She claimed her ex-husband was at her parents' house when she got home the last night she worked. He told her he made up the divorce and the paperwork was phony, so they were still married and he wanted to get back together. She claims she refused and he kidnapped her. She said it took her until a couple of days ago to get away from him. She wanted to come into work the next day. She did not call the police and he wasn't arrested. There was nothing in the papers or on the news about any of this. She was not hurt, thank God. She asked if I believed her. I did not, but told her that I really needed someone I could count on coming in reliably every day. I gave her a paycheck for 1 week. She had worked 1 day and told her I wished her good luck. I had already replaced her and her replacement was one of the best employees we ever had. Here's the malicious compliance. The next month, I came into a phone message that someone from blank company called for a reference for Karen. As my secretary is handing me the message, she's laughing at the look on my face. I asked if she was kidding. She said she was not. She said she got a call from a man saying he was the owner of a company in the area and he asked about Karen. Then my secretary asked if she could listen in on the call. She was a pistol. She then goes and gets my partner and tells him I'm going to call and give Karen a reference. Now, he is in my office laughing too. I call the guy and we make some small talk. I tell him what we do and he tells me what he wants Karen to do for him. I tactfully avoided answering any of his questions about Karen directly. I think he was beginning to suspect something. Remember folks, employers can get in a ton of trouble for bad references. He finally asked my opinion of Karen and what I said was, if you can get Karen to work for you, you will be very lucky. He heard what I said and how I said it. He repeated that back to me exactly as I said it. All my words were the right ones. It was my tone and intonation that got my point across. He thanked me and hung up. Karen comes into the office a couple days later. She looks mad but is trying to be pleasant. She told me she is having trouble finding a job and mentioned she has used me as a reference. She wanted to know if anyone from blank company has called me. She knew they did. She told me she really wants the job at blank company. I told her I had been called and that I told the guy he'd be lucky to get her to work for him. My secretary confirmed that's what I told him. She told him she was right next during the whole conversation. Karen smiled and thanked me and headed to the door. She said she wondered why she was having so much trouble getting a job. She asked if she could continue to use me for a reference and I told her absolutely. I also told her I'd tell everyone the same thing, that any employer would be lucky if they can get you to work for them. She walked away smiling, happy and clueless. Wow, I don't even I mean, come on. What do you expect? You know, that's kind of sad though that he's, I mean, well, I don't know. Some people, it's just hard for them to work, but yeah, you're doing a good job at keeping them down from making any living. All right, our next story comes also from r/MaliciousCompliance, titled, "My neighbors wanted to call a professional to mark their property line. My parents agreed. This was a long time ago, but I remembered clearly. We moved into a community with tight space in between our house and our neighbors, and we didn't like them being able to see into our kitchen. We put up a bunch of plants costing thousands, but my parents thought it would be worth it. A week later, my parents awoke to the plants completely chopped down. My father was furious and marched down to our neighbor's house. He told my father the plants were on his property line, therefore, he had total right to take them down. He warned that if anything were to go on his property again, he would report us to the authorities immediately. Later that day, my father called the company that put in the plants, and with the warranty, we could have them replaced next week for no charge. We made sure that there was no way it was on our neighbor's property. However, a few days later, we caught him chopping them down at 2 a.m. We called the police upon obstruction of property, and after a chat with my neighbor, he decided to call a professional and mark his property line. My father agreed. A few days later, I got home to find orange tape in my neighbor's yard. Apparently, his fence was 11 feet over our property line. We watched as he took down his fence, completely furious. Within the next month, we were enjoying our new space and privacy in our backyard, and my neighbor ended up losing 1/4 of his backyard. My neighbor ended up having to pay almost $10,000 for the destruction of our property, and we got to plant our plants again. Too long, didn't read. My neighbor chopped down our plants because he claimed we were on his property. After calling a professional, he lost 11 feet of his backyard and had to pay for destruction of property, and we got to keep our plants. Oh my goodness. You should have just been nice, right? And then everything would have been fine and you would have had more property. That's a bummer. Anyways, thank you all for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like it. If you have not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe, and if you really enjoyed it, please share it somewhere on the internet. If you'd also like to join our Discord, the link is in the description below. We'd love to see you. And anyways, with that being said, we shall see you next time.